afternoon, or good evening, and welcome to another HRO Today Educational Podcast. I'm Elliot Clark, the CEO of HRO Today. We publish HRO Today Magazine, HRO Today EMEA, and HRO Today APAC, as well as host the HRO Today forums and educational events held around the world, and we manage the HRO Today Association. Today, we're going to talk about leadership. It is something that every chief HR officer and HR team member is well aware of and coaches their operating executives on it. Recently, the HR Today Forum North America was held in Dallas. The theme of the conference was leading through uncertainty. Leadership is and has always been a challenge, and the nature of leadership is not static. It changes and evolves based not only on our current research, but also on those being led. That's important to think about, the workforce. Our guest today is going to talk about these evolutions and how in many organizations the model is broken and needs to be reassessed, and leaders need to be retrained in new ways. Operating executives will look to HR for guidance, so this is a challenge that only the CHRO and the HR teams can address. If you can improve the leadership model, you can achieve the HR version of nirvana, which I'm going to have described in just a few minutes, by reaching the state we call talent optimization, something we all aspire to. So I'm thrilled to introduce our guest, Dr. Matt Poepsel, Vice President for the Predictive Index. Now, Matt Poepsel has been a top executive at the Predictive Index for more than a decade. The Predictive Index was founded more than 6 decades ago, and since that time, their mission hasn't changed. Their passion is to understand people and teams, specifically what drives behaviors at work. The company was founded in 1955, and their Predictive Index behavioral assessment was created through a normative sample of thousands of people and has been the subject of over 500 validation studies. Over 6 decades since, thousands of organizations have used the Predictive Index in nearly every job and industry around the world. Their quest, they would tell you, like yours, is to discover how to impact that behavior, ignite enthusiasm, and align business strategy with talent strategy. Matt, welcome to the podcast. Would you like to add anything about the Predictive Index for our audience?
Well, Elliot, I can't thank you enough. I'm thrilled to be here today. And the only thing I'd add is that the question I get most often is when we say we want to optimize talent, what is it specifically that we're trying to optimize? And I always like to say it's the performance, the engagement, and the well-being of every individual team and organization on the planet. So even though we have 6 decades of history, it feels in many ways like we're really just getting started.
Well, if you're going to do every organization on the planet, you're going to have to work on your work-life balance a little bit because you have a lot more time at the office. So, Matt, you and I recently spoke about this concept of talent optimization. I know you have a definition on your website, but talent optimization and how this leadership and performance management models, are based on antiquated views of both performance and the workplace. And the workplace changes. I mean, remote work, hybrid, et cetera. There's lots of changes taking place. Moreover, the changing tastes of this younger generational cohort and their values about work, whether management likes it or not, are different. The disconnect that this creates causes friction and makes the jobs of leaders harder as they're trained in ways that no longer work. So how can we solve the disconnect, and what should HR do to evolve the leadership and leadership training models?
I love the question because, as you pointed out, the work has fundamentally evolved. The worker themselves, they've also evolved, but leadership really hasn't kept pace. And so to your point about the youngest workers that we have today, we're about 7 to 10 years into Generation Z's entry into the workforce, depending on your industry. And I was hosting a Perspectives webinar the other day, and the audience members were complaining about things like poor work ethic or troubles with communication or handling change, adoption of technology, and even outright ageism. And I was reading an article recently, and it talked about a generation full of slackers that were more intent on job hopping than staying loyal. And what's funny about that article is it was actually talking about Generation X, my generation, because it was written in 1995. And so some of these things have been with us for a long time. There's always been this natural tension between the new and a new generation looking for independence and kind of coming into their own adulthood at a very young and impressionable time, as compared to the established group that's already in power that is really more interested in conformity. And I think that what we've learned most about Gen Z is that they are more vocal than prior generations. They've had access to social media for longer. They've been asked about their opinions through grade school and beyond. And what they're being vocal about right now is these demands from leaders to be human. And this is why I'm so excited about the future role of CHROs and HR leaders, because the business leaders on average have forgotten how to be human. So what Gen Z is really asking us for is around opportunities to experience meaning or to have an impact or to have higher levels of belonging and inclusion or to experience wellness at work. Not how do I fit my life into the periphery of work, but what role do I want work to play in my life? And these should be considered universals. But it's almost as if I hear an attitude from boomers and Gen Xers like myself that's almost saying, we didn't figure out how we can get those same things, so you don't get to either. And there's even been this fairly ugly celebration of Gen Z beginning to sell out in some cases and realize that somebody's got to pay for all this stuff. And we shouldn't be celebrating this. We should be looking at how we can evolve our workforces so that, yes, we get business performance. That's non-negotiable, but that we also find ways to meet our human needs as well. I mentioned the HR leaders, and I'm really excited about our most recent ebook, which is all about becoming the CEO's most valuable partner. And this is all about how we can drive the future valuation of our business and driving their human performance as well as business performance all at the same time.
Yeah, it's interesting when you talk about the aspect of being human and the views of Gen Z, and your point's well taken. We had the same complaints about Gen X and then the millennials and now Gen Z. But, I recently spoke about the growth of cynicism and the fact that, employees, if they think all employers, sort of aren't very good, then why not ghost your first day of work, or why not, change jobs every year? Do you think these flawed leadership models that are sort of denying humanity in favor of, production metrics are actually driving cynicism and making the employees feel disaffected?
100%. I think that the larger businesses get, the more technical they get, the more they dehumanize the work on average. And you almost have to work really hard when you're inside of these organizations to really create those levels of being and belonging and the types of relationships that keep people in place. And that doesn't always happen. And so I'm doing research for a project coming up called Talent 2030, the future state of the workforce. And I'm predicting this massive corporate backlash, which is basically what's happening in the youngest generations is they're putting peer pressure on one another when they elect to work for big companies. Because when you start to see the headlines and companies are laying off thousands of people at a time just to make the numbers look a certain way, that is creating this push out of the larger established businesses. And what's happening is that the small to mid-sized companies almost have an unfair advantage of addressing human needs while still providing the opportunity to do good and meaningful work. So I think there's absolutely a relationship between the leadership as it's experienced by the modern worker and ultimately whether they're going to stick around, whether it be not taking that next job or just checking out a little bit earlier or working on a side hustle. All these things are absolutely happening because of a leadership vacuum.
So let's talk a little bit about how you fix it. So now that HR is, let's say, working on evolving the leadership model, let's talk about logistically how to accomplish this. So many of the products HR is using, the voice of the employee products, the performance analytics, they're all in disparate systems and they don't communicate, right? To achieve this, aspired state of talent optimization, using the classic definition of the word optimization, one would think that you need to both manage the model, the training, and the data and analytics that will tell you if performance is trending in the right direction, where's the business problems exist, if you will. How can HR manage both that leadership model and also get all of that data to help them achieve talent optimization? What do you guys recommend?
Yeah, the very first thing is that we have to take a holistic approach to leadership. In the old days, we would focus on delivering results, and that's still important. But also now we have to drive engagement. Also, that's not all that new. We've done that for decades. But increasingly encouraging well-being and also growing future leaders has never been more important. So those four key elements of leadership are all essential. So the practice of leadership, especially as led by our CHROs and HR leaders, is really intensely data-driven, but it's also tightly integrated. And so give you an example is these historic data sets. You mentioned PI has been around since 1955. And so when you look at behavioral fit, for example, and personality traits, that's been around for a long time, and so is engagement. But we've also have to create and collect these new data sets. PI had to create new science, for example, when it came to managing strategy in human terms. So the behavioral drivers of strategy. Or what about contextual analysis? We were talking a little bit about multi-generational a second ago. I would love to know from CHROs, can you pull up the teams working on innovation projects and show me how multi-generational they really are. Because if they lack diversity, you're not going to get the same innovation outcomes you would otherwise. You are only a little bit away from being able to pull those types of analytics to make sure that the advanced AI and the modeling we're building is actually tying back to the business in a powerful way. But having said that, the technology that I'm mentioning is really kind of a double-edged sword, because it goes back to dehumanizing that work a little bit when we see headlines about how ChatGPT and other things are coming for jobs and look at all this efficiency we're going to drive. And we forget that we need people to absorb that change and also take us to new places. We're not just eliminating all of our employees. Leaders themselves, they don't know how to do these things, how to move from that dehumanization to rehumanizing businesses. So we have to equip them. And in my mind, that just comes down to giving them the training and the technology, the tools and the templates they need to do it. And this is where CHROs again and HR leaders have a real opportunity to foster a new partnership with the business. And that's going to require higher levels than we've ever seen of being relevant. So many times I talk to business people about their relationship with HR and they say, well, they're just not relevant to what I'm doing. I'm like, how is that possible? You're talking about the people part of your business, but it's all in the framing. And how do you provide that value and recognize that the investment we need to make is in business tech, not HR tech. HR tech is for HR people. That's what business people think. We need business tech. And increasingly, the future of business is human. So to me, they're one and the same, but a lot of it comes down to positioning, branding, the mindset behind it. And so at the end, I would just say that the future of business is intensely human. The good news is that most of HR gets it, not the transactional parts, not the compliance parts, but I'm talking about really strategic HR, the deep value that's there. Again, that most valuable partner, that eBook example about how are we going to help drive the future valuation of this business that the board and the CEO cares about by getting better at the human parts that are left, because AI is not going to be a long-term competitive differentiator in the marketplace. It's things that we all must adopt, but it's our humans that are going to make the difference. So this is where that optimal leadership, again, of performance, engagement, and well-being at every level from every leader, that has to be our objective. And I know with the right CHRO and HR leader partnerships, that's exactly what we're going to get.
Matt, it almost sounds like you're saying that part of what HR needs to think about is retraining the operating executives. Right now, they look at HR and they say, well, if I have a problem with a difficult employee, if I have a problem with an underperforming executive, or I have a pending labor dispute, that's when I go to HR. They don't look to HR to say, okay, well, I need to make HR my partner in performance management and productivity, right? So that HR needs to now go out and say, hey, you guys are only using part of our potential to you. This other part of our potential is optimizing this human performance piece, and you're not calling on us often to do that. We just do your training, et cetera. Do you think that HR teams need to make that argument more succinctly to their C-suite colleagues and operating executives?
Yes, without question. I think what's going to happen in my prediction is the HR field is about to be torn in half. There's the transactional bits that are very quickly either being outsourced to agencies or they're going the way of the AI tools and the machine learning models and things. And I think what's going to happen is there's this opportunity to really step into the strategic and the hopeful future, the most human bits, where the business, to be honest with you, needs help. The leaders don't come out of business schools with all this great experience that HR professionals have. We teach our business leaders all about strategy and operations and process and technology as if we didn't have any people. So now all of a sudden you have this opportunity to make the shift, I call it, from human resources to human potential. How do we get the most out of our workforce in a way that is intensely performance driven, of course, but is also intensely human? And I think that this is where business leaders can find a real strong partnership, one that's not reactive, the way that you had described, Elliot, that I see too every doggone day, but one that's actually proactive and one that comes from a very deeply personal, deeply human place, because that is the future of business. And in 5 years, again, I mentioned the Talent 2030 research, 11% of the workforce will be Generation Alpha. You think that Gen Z is bringing some new stuff to the workplace, just you wait. It's only going to get more demanding in terms of our ability to meet workers' human needs and not just the technical needs of the business for all of this to work. And so again, those relationships, as you pointed out, CHROs are very well positioned if they're willing to evolve. The ones that aren't, anyone in the HR field who's not, well, unfortunately, those days are going to come to a close.
Well, and certainly we've seen a lot of changes. I joke my first resume was on a clay tablet. So we've made a lot of progress since then. I can tell you one thing about the future, Matt. I'm going to have you back on this podcast to talk some more because this is a deep topic and we're sort of scratching the surface. And I recommend anyone listening that you look up the ebook on the screen and get a little bit more about the philosophy of how to, achieve talent optimization by focusing on the human side of human resources and business in general. Matt, thanks so much for taking part in the podcast. This was great.
Elliot, it was truly an honor. Thank you for having me.
Well, we will certainly welcome you back in the future. And to those of you in our listening audience, thank you for your time and attention. It's a pretty fascinating topic and one we're going to continue to talk about as HR is evolving, leadership is evolving, and the only thing that is constant in the universe, according to Albert Einstein, the only variable that is constant is change. We all need to be used to that. So thank you again for your time and attention, and we look forward to you joining us on our next HRO Today Educational Podcast.